This is part one of my introduction to the Gospel of Thomas and Yeshua seminar that I'll be presenting at Aromas at the Home Temple Sanctuary near Santa Cruz, California in May of 2009 during the Wesak weekend. What is the Gospel of Thomas? It's a Coptic Gnostic version of a Greek collection of 114 inner circle or initiatic sayings known as logia of Jesus that claim transmission from the Apostle Thomas. It was discovered in an Egyptian cave in 1945 as part of a huge library of Gnostic and Hermetic writings from the early Christian period. It's known as the Nag Hammadi Library. The library was hidden to protect the documents from destruction by zealous Christian partisans of Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria, who drove pagans out of Alexandria into desert enclaves on the Upper Nile. It was translated into Coptic from the earlier Greek version, which was edited into its current form by Syrian Gnostics about the year 200 of the Christian era, or 200 A.D., and was brought to Egyptian probably by ascetic monks from Asia Minor in the early Desert Father movement. And that may be the genre model for the Philokalia, which are the collected sayings of the Desert Fathers and Saints. And you might want to reference Thomas Merton's short book, which is an abbreviation of these, called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers. Now, fragments of the original Greek versions survive among the Oxyrhynchus papyri. Now, why is the Gospel of Thomas important? It's just a Gnostic document, isn't it? Well, yes, it is, but Thomas was expanded from a Greek translation of Aramaic Davarim, or revelations, given by Yeshua only to his inner circle of apostles. Scholars think the earliest kernel of Thomas was dictated by an original disciple or apostle of Yeshua to a Christian scribe between the years 30 and 50 of the Christian era, AD 30 and 50. That makes it older and more authentic than Paul's epistles and the four Gospels, which were all written later. It's comparable to the lost Q source of Jesus' sayings used by Matthew and Luke, and contains many of the same teachings and parables. Unlike Q, however, the original kernel sayings of Thomas preserve the literal Aramaic idioms and constructions of oral transmission. The Q sayings of Jesus were paraphrased into Greek idioms, so probably they were written down as notes, but the Thomas sayings were dictated to a bilingual scribe by an eyewitness disciple, possibly Thomas, since that is the tradition to whom the literature is ascribed. Now, Aramaic was the spoken language of Yeshua, Jesus, and his disciples. It was a dialect of Hebrew. It was written in Hebrew script and alphabet letters until the 2nd century, when the common script became Syriac. The existence of initiatic or secret teachings from Mar Yeshua is mentioned several times even in the Gospels in the New Testament. You can look at many kinds of evidences of this. He spoke publicly to crowds of hearers, but more privately to his disciples, of whom traditionally he had 70, and to his apostles, the closest group, of whom he traditionally had 12. The Gospel of Mary may carry some of these traditions forward, but the secret Gospel of Mark tells us much more about these secret traditions. This is a document discovered by Morton Smith at the Mar Saba Monastery, where it's very difficult to get anything in their archives. They have things that are very ancient in there, and they don't like Westerners to come in. But he came in with a camera and permission, and he discovered a letter written by Clement of Alexandria in a palimpsest on another document. And it was written to Theodore, and it was dealing with the fact that the homosexual sect of Carpocrates had stolen the secret Gospel of Mark, the other Gospel that Mark wrote that was not for the general public. Now, many scholars consider Secret Mark to be authentic, and there are several quotes from Secret Mark in this epistle, plus other important remarks. Those who accuse Smith of forgery have to deal with the fact that he has photographs, translations, that the hand is written several centuries ago as it would have been by a copyist, and that the style is exactly that of Clement, and so on. Let's take a closer look at what Clement reveals in this letter. He tells us about Christian initiatic secrecy, And one of the parts of the letter, he says, "For even if they, the Carpocratians, should say something true, one who loves the truth should not even so agree with them. One must never give way, nor should one concede even that the secret gospel is by mark, but should even deny it on oath. For," and now he quotes from Yeshua, from a philosopher, "for not all true things are to be said to all men." There was definitely an initiatic tradition and a secret tradition in Alexandria. Now, the inner circle of Talmidim, or disciples of Yeshua, would have been privy to his inner and special revelations. They would be called davarim. When he spoke a davar, he spoke a divine revelation with the force of total authority. And that's what these secret teachings would have been. Here's a little bit more from Clement. He tells us that Mark composed a more spiritual gospel for the use of those who were being perfected. Nevertheless, he did not divulge the things not to be uttered, nor did he write down the hierophantic teaching of the Lord, whatever that was. But to the stories already written he added yet others, and moreover brought in certain sayings, of which he knew the interpretation would, as a mystagogue, lead the hearers into the innermost sanctuary of truth hidden by 7 veils. Thus in sum he prepared matters neither grudgingly nor incautiously, in my opinion, and dying he left his composition to the church in Alexandria, where it even yet is most carefully guarded, being read only to those who are being initiated into the great mysteries, the Aramaic Ratzim HaMalkuth, the mysteries of the sovereignty, wrongly translated as mysteries of the kingdom. Now, Thomas seems to be a collection of initiatic sayings such as might be found in secret Mark if or when it is ever recovered. Now, if you are interested in the scholarly work of isolating the kernel, the first and oldest layer of the Gospel of Thomas, you might want to read the recent work by the scholar April de Konik. She divides the accumulations of the logia that eventually ended up in our Coptic Gnostic version of Thomas in this way. From the years 30 to 50, there were most of the major and what we would consider to be the authentic sayings were written down or were dictated to a scribe, and then they were turned into Koine Greek. Some accreted a little bit after that in the period when Paul came along and started doing his writing. His are the earliest writings in Christianity. More accreted during the time of the writing of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. That would be in the late 1st century. And these were probably inauthentic. Some of them may have been authentic and not gotten into the original list. And then finally, things in the late 1st and early 2nd century about contemporary with the writing of the Gospel of John, which are pretty much all Gnostic sayings, and they've been Gnosticized. I separate them a little bit differently, but if you're interested in the process, you can read her book. Now here's the methodology that I use to get back to the original teachings of Yeshua. First, I take Greek texts and equivalents and sources and parallels and apply them to the Coptic Gospel of Thomas. And I do that in order to reconstruct a vocabulary of the original Greek Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which was written earlier than this and which this translates. And then using the Greek, we are able to separate the Gnostic interpolation and spin to recover the original collection of sayings in Aramaic, because we know the equivalence between Greek and Aramaic. We have lots of sources for that. And so we will then examine the original Aramaic words and concepts and davarim of Yeshua. And once we have gotten that far, we can separate later Gnostic interpolations from the original davarim, because a lot of the original ones have had a phrase or word added to it as well that's just Gnostic. We can understand the original Jewish Kabbalistic concepts and underlay them, and we can translate, paraphrase, and interpret the original meanings of the davarim spoken by the Master Yeshua, and see how they apply to 21st century people in their spiritual quest. And we're going to begin with the original davar that introduced the collection. For the rest of the presentation and information on the Easter seminar, go to the Gospel of Thomas Part 2, part of my Pre-Christian Teachings of Yeshua series.